There is more to the game Call of Juarez Gunslinger than you might think. On its surface, it's a game about a rugged bounty hunter seeking revenge in a mythic landscape of the Wild West, complete with shootouts, outlaws, and gripping tales of adventure. But, according to Dr. Justyna Fruzinska, a professor of American literature at the University of Lodz, there's a deeper significance to the game in terms of how it uses narrative techniques to question the reliability of memory and the construction of historical myths. So in this video, I'm going to dig into Dr. Fruzinska's work to look beyond the surface of Call of Juarez and to explore the game's unique storytelling mechanics, such as its unreliable narrator and recursive storytelling method, both of which invite players to reconsider what it means to know history. I aim to show, using an article by Dr. Fruzinska, which is cited in the video's description, that games like Call of Juarez can transcend entertainment to become interactive explorations of narrative and historical complexity, which challenge us to rethink the boundaries between fact, fiction, and memory. I'm Dr. Darren Reed, and this is Video Game Lit Review. Thank you everyone for tuning in. I am a historian at McGill University, and this is a series where I try to take academic research about video games, most of which is hidden behind paywalls or is written in very complex jargon, and translate it into short, accessible videos. This is a relatively new series. I think this is only my second or third video in the series, so please let me know your thoughts in the comments below and make suggestions if there's any games you would like me to cover in the future, or suggestions about how to make these videos better or more useful to you. To understand how Call of Juarez Gunslinger stands out as a video game, we need to frame it within a debate in game studies between things called narratology and ludology. Traditionally, narratology approaches games as narratives, suggesting that we can analyze games using tools from literature and film studies. Ludologists, however, argue that games are inherently different due to their interactive nature, which gives players agency in shaping stories. Ludologists contend that studying games as if they were books or movies misses the whole point, because unlike readers or viewers, players actively influence the outcome through their choices and their actions, creating a unique form of entertainment. Call of Juarez Gunslinger exemplifies this debate because it combines elements from traditional storytelling with interactive gameplay elements. It has a structured narrative through the main story, yet the player, we players, actively shape the experience by reliving and reinterpreting the main character's memories. So as I'll demonstrate, the game occupies a middle ground in this debate, where it uses narrative devices typical of literature, but makes them immersive and interactive in a way that's unique to video games. So a defining feature of Call of Juarez Gunslinger is its use of an unreliable narrator. Silas Greaves, the protagonist, recounts his life story to a saloon audience in Abilene, Kansas. His story unfolds in flashbacks, with the player taking on his role in reliving these events. Silas's narration is not straightforward. His tales are frequently exaggerated or inconsistent, which often prompts listeners to express their disbelief. For instance, when Silas boasts about fighting thousands of Apaches, his audience doubts his credibility, laughing off his story as a tall tale. But the game uses this narrative device to immerse players in Silas's questionable memories. The interactive nature of the game means that players are not simply listening to his story, they're experiencing it firsthand. And that blend of gameplay with unreliable narration places players in a unique position. They must actively decide how much of Silas's story they believe, adding an additional layer of skepticism that's uncommon in traditional media. But to further complicate Silas's narrative, the game introduces nuggets of truth, which are collectible items scattered throughout the game that provide historical facts. These nuggets often contradict Silas's version of events, suggesting that he may be reshaping or fabricating elements of his story. For example, Silas claims that he killed Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, despite historical records showing that they died in Bolivia. Similarly, he boasts of killing Jesse James, but historical accounts tell us that James was shot by Robert Ford. So these inconsistencies force players to confront the limits of memory and myth. Because while Silas's account reflects his self-image as the hero of the Wild West, the nuggets of truth expose the inaccuracies of his story. And by collecting those collectible items, players gain an alternative perspective, realizing that the version of history Silas presents may be more fiction than fact. And this technique offers a critique of how legends, particularly those of the American frontier, are constructed and sustained over time, often at the expense of factual accuracy. And one of the game's most innovative narrative techniques is its use of recursive storytelling, where scenes change in response to Silas's shifting memory or in response to his listeners' questions. At various points, Silas's narration rewinds or alters based on what he recalls or decides to embellish. For instance, during a shootout with Pat Garrett, Silas first describes a deadly encounter. However, when one listener questions him, the game rewinds and Silas offers an alternative memory where Garrett captures him instead. The shifting narrative invites players to question what they've experienced. As signs are replayed with different outcomes, players realize that Silas's version of events may not be reliable, and this narrative device shows how memory can be selective and malleable, shaped by personal biases and external influences, and it raises questions about how we remember and interpret our own experiences. But perhaps the most striking element in Call of Juarez Gunslinger is how the game actively constructs Silas's memories, making players complicit in the myth-making process. In one memorable sequence, Silas describes himself running out of ammunition, only for a dead Apache to miraculously appear with supplies. But this event, absurd as it is, becomes real for the player as they experience it alongside Silas. And these moments underscore the game's central message, that memory is not always a straightforward recollection of events, but rather memory is a constructed narrative that serves the storyteller's agenda. And by directly participating in Silas's embellished memories, players become a part of his myth, effectively bringing the legend to life. At its core, Call of Juarez Gunslinger is a critique of the American West's romanticized image. The game's writer, Harris Orkin, has described these narrative tricks as a way to highlight how the myths of the Wild West were created in the first place. By questioning Silas's version of events, the game encourages players to view history with skepticism, recognizing that the iconic tales of the West are often based on exaggerated or fabricated stories. And the game's structure reveals how easily legends are formed and perpetuated, suggesting that history is not just a record of facts, but also a blend of stories shaped by cultural biases and by collective memory. And as players, we experience this process firsthand, witnessing how the game alternates between immersion in Silas's story and a critical distance that calls his version into question. Overall, Call of Juarez Gunslinger represents a profound exploration of memory, narrative, and historical myth. By blending gameplay with unreliable narration, recursive storytelling, and historical counterpoints, it challenges players to think critically about the stories they consume. Through Silas Greaves, we see how personal memories can evolve into grandiose myths, raising questions about what it means to know history. But I want to know what you think. Do you agree that Silas's unreliable narration makes this game a critique of how we remember and shape history? Or do you see it differently, perhaps as a way to add depth to the story without necessarily challenging historical myths? I'd also love to hear any additional comments you have about the game's approach to blending action with introspection, and how you think it shapes our perception of the Wild West. Please feel free to share your reflections and any critiques you have of these ideas, and also to suggest any other games that you would like a video about. But that's all I have for you today. If you enjoyed this video, check out some of my other videos. I have a series just about history through games called History Through Games, or I have this series about literature in general, scholarship in general about video games. Otherwise, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Farewell!